Welcome to episode number 2 of the Speed Secrets podcast with today's guest, Jeff Braun. We'll talk high performance and race driving and give you some tips and advice that you can use to improve your own driving.
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors, and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. This is going to be fun. Today's guest is a race engineer who's won the Sebring 12-hour race 8 times, the Daytona 24-hour race once, and the IMSA, ALMS, and Grand Am Championship 7 times. He's engineered cars in sports car racing, Indy cars, NASCAR, Rallycross, and even top fuel drag racing. Most important, he's worked with drivers from gentleman racers to Formula One, Indy, NASCAR, and Le Mans winners. And his son is Colin Braun, who has raced in open wheel sports cars and NASCAR, and is one of the top young drivers in the world. Welcome, Jeff Braun.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ross. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Obviously, we've worked together a lot and been friends for a long time. Over 20 years, yeah. And I know that we could talk all day long about car setup and engineering stuff, but I want us to talk about drivers and driving. So if you're okay with it, I'm just going to jump in and start asking you a few questions.
Yeah, I love it. Let's go.
Okay. So I always think it's interesting to think about the differences between the best drivers and the not so best drivers. And so what do you think is the main difference? What is it that makes the difference between the best drivers and the less than best drivers?
I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is commitment. So the top world-class drivers, I've been lucky enough to work with some, Formula One drivers and top world-class sports car drivers, and it's just commitment. And I don't mean commitment to a brake zone or to getting to throttle early. I mean commitment to every aspect of race car driving, from how they prepare for a race, prepare for a race weekend, understanding their car, understanding the engineering, understanding the strategy that we're going to deploy. It's, looking at videos. They're committed on every aspect, working out, being stronger than the next guy. It's total 100% commitment, as I'm pretty sure any world-class athlete is that committed, and those guys are. The not so good guys are probably committed to a lesser extent, and it's that's pretty much the difference. It's not. Well, I mean, there's some foreign-in skills and things like that, but to me, it's pretty incredible to work with guys that are as committed as some of these race drivers are.
And I guess, so then I take that and I go, well, that's great. They're getting paid big bucks to be that committed. But, for the average person, average racer, or average, track day, club HPDE guy, I actually don't think it's a whole lot different. The level of commitment might be lower, but the best in that world, they're more committed to doing what it takes as well, I think.
Exactly. I mean, I get the chance to work with some gentleman drivers too in the Pro-Am categories, and those guys have made enough money to be able to afford, top level sports cars, and they were just that committed to their business, whatever that business was, to be able to earn that much money to be able to do it. So I see that those guys bring the same commitment level. Maybe they have to work Monday through Thursday of that week at their business, but when they get to the racetrack on Friday, I see the difference even with those guys is their level of commitment. So if you go down to a club racer or a track day guy, you can be committed for the time that you're doing that. You can still look at your notes from last time that you were at the track. You can still study the in-car video, the night before you go to the next race. You can still do those exact same things that set the pros apart from the kind of notch down pros. You can do those things as a as a track day guy and still have that level of commitment or work ethic, and it pays big dividends over, over what you did the week before or over your other competitors.
And I guess, it doesn't need to be massive amounts of commitment. I mean, it doesn't need to be, a full-time job or anything like that, but just doing a little bit more. I mean, I know that on your off weekends, when you're not working, you go and do track days on motorcycles, right? And you've also, you and Colin go and race in chump car races, and I went and did that chump car race with you guys. Early last year, and
right.
And the level of commitment and preparation for your chump car effort as a hobby thing on a weekend, it's just it's different.
Yeah, and those are great examples. I go track day motorcycle racing, and it's just kind of, or track daying, and I have this list of things on my phone that I want to do better. And I don't want to be a professional road racing motorcycle racer. I don't want to do that. I enjoy going fast on the motorcycle. I enjoy trying to get better and learning the little things that get me better. And so every time I come in, I write some things down. Oh man, I was bad at this, bad at that, bad at that. And the next time I go out, I look at that list and I try to get better at that. That's about as basic as it gets, but at least you're trying to improve each time. And every track day car person or HPD driver or whatever can do that. Just write down. So yeah, every driver I know gets frustrated about something, and they'll come back, and I will come back when I run my motorcycle, and this guy cut me off, or I did miss the brake zone there, or man, I can't get the apex at turn 2. It frustrates me like crazy. Just write those things down, and before you go out for the next session, review it. It takes 5 seconds. Those are the kind of things that the pros do, maybe on a more extensive level, and they have the time to do that. But everybody has time to write down 5 things on their phone. Send yourself a text or do it on your note app on your phone, and just look at it every time. And then the next time you go, you can look at that again, and at least you'll work on the things that frustrate you. And most of us aren't going to be professional race car drivers. We're not being paid to do that, but we want to get better. And we want to be less frustrated. So if turn 2, missing the apex, is always your frustrating thing, and you can fix that, you'll have more fun. Yeah. And that's the way I approach my motorcycling and the chump car thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a little Post-it note up on the wall right in front of me, in front of my desk, from a guy named Robert Cialdini, who wrote a book called Influence, and then the latest book called Persuasion. And it's all about how people are influenced and how they respond to things. But he wrote, and I took this out of his book, he said, people live up to what they write down. And I think that's great. That's key to, I mean, the second you write down, turn in later for turn 1, it's, you're more likely to live up to that than if you just go on the track and kind of, I think I'm hoping that I'm going to turn in later for turn 1. So it's amazing how just writing a few notes like that can make a huge difference. So.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think talking about it too, if you got I don't care if it's your wife, your friend, or your dog, Fido.
Yeah.
I got to turn in earlier. It just ingrains it in your mind. So
yeah. Woof, woof, go.
The difference. Yeah, exactly. It's those are the basic things that are really easy to do. And I think, and the pros do it. It's one of those pro tips you always hear about. Well, there's a pro tip that costs absolutely zero.
Speaking of pros, I mean, who are some of your favorite drivers that you've worked with through the years? And yeah. And I guess why? What made them your favorite? So
everybody has a different skill set, and it's going to sound funny being an engineer, but what I like, the drivers I remember the most are the ones I learned the most from. It sounds weird, I'm the engineer, I should tell the drivers, what setup to run and things like that. But the driver engineering relationship is 50-50. I always told Colin when he was growing up that if your car doesn't handle right, it's at least half your fault and half your engineer's fault. And a lot of drivers are like, no, the engineer is supposed to set it up. I'm like, no, you got to work with them, explain it to him, guide him, push him in the right direction to get your car set up the way you want. And the best drivers I've worked with were great at that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm going to say, you know, okay, I'm sitting here, talking to you. I remember when we worked on shocks on a WSC car, you know, and we worked on shocks, and you started to understand. I was explaining to you how they worked, and then you were getting the idea of how that felt on the racetrack. And then I was getting feedback from when I made this graph look a little different. You told me how it felt in the car, and then I could then relate the graphs to what it felt like, and you were relating what it felt like to the graphs. And so I get a driver like yourself that can do that, and I learn a lot. So, you know, for some names, I'll give Ross Bentley as a guy I learned a lot from and then had a lot of fun running. Michele Alboreto was absolutely like that, ex-Ferrari Formula One driver. I had him at Indy right after he had just done Formula One. The things...
And I just, sorry to interrupt there, but I saw your post on Facebook, and you told the little story about Alboreto showing up for his first time and looking at an Indy car set up for the oval. Share that with us.
So we're at Homestead, and we had done a couple road race tests with the Indy car, and this was going to be his first oval. And he comes in with his backpack, and you know, it's an hour before we're going to run. The car sitting on pit lane. The guys are getting it ready, setting up the pits. I'm standing in front of the car. Michele walks up, and he had obviously just arrived, and he's going to check things, see how things are going. And he looks at the car, he kind of squats down in front of it, and he looks at it, and I'm like, what is he looking at? And in his Italian way, he says to me, he goes, who's driven this car before? I said, nobody. This is your car. And he goes, it looks like it's been in an accident already, because the tires are cambered weird, the car's tilted for an oval setup, the right rear tire's bigger, the wings are at different angles. And I looked at it, and it, in fact, did look like it had hit something seriously. And he just shook his head and like, okay, I don't really understand what's going on here, but I'll drive it.
Yeah.
So he taught me a lot of things. I worked with a Spanish driver for me in Velez for lots of years. He was absolutely the least technical driver ever. I mean, he had no idea what was inside of a shock absorber. He couldn't tell you, you know, he didn't know really anything, but he had great feel for what the car was doing, and he could really relate that feel back to me. So learned a lot from him. I had, you know, people with vastly different experiences, which always is fun. You know, Stefan Johansson taught me a lot, and I learned a lot from him. And we had fun together all the way to, you know, I really like the gentleman drivers that don't have the experience, because they, as long as they don't try to sound like an engineer and they just tell me what it feels like, it's great. Sometimes when a driver says, well, and a lot of them will seem embarrassed because they think they should be, you know, giving this big engineering thing. But if they don't, they'll say, well, you know, I went through that corner and I turned the steering wheel, and then it started like the front started hopping, and then it kind of made this funny sound. And then I felt this through the brake pedal. It kind of was like pulsing, and, you know, and they're embarrassed because they're not giving some technical explanation. But those are the greatest sometimes. And those guys are fun to work with because you can see them getting better and challenging themselves and all of that. So it's a long list of guys that I get to work with. And, you know, and of course it can be really fun too. Now I get to work with my son, and they pay us to do that. So that's pretty darn cool too.
Yeah. Not many guys get to do that. That's very cool.
No,
so, you know, having looked at data and video for since data and video was invented for race cars, right?
Right, pretty much. Yeah.
You know, you've seen the throttle traces, the brake traces, the steering traces, all those things. You've seen that of these great drivers. is there something that you kind of look at and you go, the best drivers seem to do that more often than others?
Yep, and you are, when we've worked together, when you and I've worked together, I've seen a lot of that from your analysis, because you're doing the same thing from a driving standpoint. But I would say the one thing, I think a lot of people who start looking at data traces end up focusing too much on the minimum speed in the corner, because they will go, oh, I'm 2 miles an hour faster at the slowest point of the corner based on this data. And I always think that people put too much stock in that. What I see is the driver that gets to the full throttle the earliest is the guy that has the advantage. Because in my way of thinking, if I want to be the king of minimum speed, I'll just don't put on the brakes and just go flying across the apex 20 miles an hour faster, crash on the other end, but I've got the minimum speed, record. So if you have minimum speed, that's really good. A lot of times it ends up hurting you at the exit. And I think that's where a lot of drivers miss that. So the one thing I see for the good drivers, they get the thing turned and get on the throttle earlier and make that straightaway longer.
And obviously, I mean, it's, I guess what makes this sport so challenging and so much fun is that, hey, I could come into a corner and I could go 15 miles an hour slower minimum speed, and I'd get to the throttle sooner than anybody else. But I'd be starting from such a low speed that I wouldn't be able to make that up. So
exactly the opposite problem.
Yeah, right. There is no kind of simple, I mean, there's no formula that says always do this, right?
No.
If you overslow it and you're having to start accelerating from too low a speed, that hurts you. If you carry too much minimum speed through the middle of the corner and that delays you getting to full throttle, that hurts you.
That hurts you. And that's what's cool about this sport, is because you get to do more than one lap per weekend.
Yeah.
So you get to do 10 laps. So you can try it. If you understand what we just talked about, you can try it one way, then try it the other way and see what the lap time does.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some corners where minimum speed is ultra important, and some corners where getting on the throttle early is ultra important. I just ran a driver at Daytona for the Ferrari Challenge World Finals, and we worked on turn 6, which is the one that leads on to the banking into NASCAR 2 and goes all the way down the straightaway to the bus stop. And all we did was work on early throttle because it's a long straightaway.
Yeah.
And it was 0.8 of a second, and just immediately 0.8 quicker. And we just said, don't worry about carrying speed through the middle. Get the car turned, start your straightaway on, 50 feet earlier than the next guy, get on the throttle, and it worked. That wouldn't apply using Daytona necessarily for the kink, which is a fourth gear, almost flat out corner. Maybe
right.
That's not the same answer.
Yeah. Well, I guess if there was one answer, this would be boring and we wouldn't bother
right,
doing
I was
it, right?
Just gonna say, that wouldn't be any fun.
That would not be any fun.
Right.
So, I said I wanted to talk about driving and drivers, but having you, one of the best race engineers in the world here, and not give some piece of advice about car setup, that would be a lot of really disappointed people here. So, let's assume that we don't have a lot of Formula One drivers listening in on this. A lot of NASCAR drivers or IndyCar drivers may not be listening in on this yet. I'm pretty sure
right.
that Lewis Hamilton's he's peeking in the side here, but
he better be. If he's committed the
yeah.
way he should be taking advantage of every opportunity to get better, and this is certainly one of them.
Yeah, okay. I'll give him a call.
Okay.
But is there some sort of, and obviously, we're not talking about purpose-built race cars. We're talking about more, track day cars and stuff like that, and club racing stuff. Is there kind of a piece of advice that you would give a driver who is probably his own engineer, his own mechanic, his own everything, around car setup? Like something that would just kind of go, okay, if you keep this in mind, it's going to help you tune your car better.
Yes, and I think that comes down to what you have available to you. I see a lot of people, some people ask me that question and they have a modern sports racer, a purpose-built race car. And they have shock absorbers they can adjust. They have spring rates they can change. Some people have a track day car that is the car that they drive to work every day. And they're not going to change springs, and they're not going to change suspension settings and shock absorbers, and they have a tire pressure gauge. So the first thing is to figure out what you have available to you, and don't get fixated on, I'm going to need new springs in my Viper, and that's expensive, and I don't have springs, and I don't know how to change them, and it takes me a day. And don't worry about that. Do what you can do. Everybody can get a tire pressure gauge and an air bottle and adjust their tire pressures. So start where you can start and don't overcomplicate things. If you can change tire pressures, again, a lot of it's trial and error. People would be really surprised, all the data and all the simulations we have and everything. They think we know exactly what to do. We punch it in the computer and it tells us go stiffer on spring and lower on tire pressure. But a lot of times, we're running a new Porsche for the first time, new to us, a Porsche GT3 car. And we go to Daytona to try to learn the car, and we're doing sweeps, what we call sweeps. And sweeps is just guessing in order is really all it is. We go, that's
deliberate guessing. I like that.
Right. Deliberate guessing. Right?
Yeah.
It sounds like, we're doing sweeps. Really some technical thing. No, we go, okay, here's our tire pressure. I wonder what it would do. It's understeering. I wonder what it would do if we put less tire pressure in. So we drain out 2 PSI and send our driver out. He goes, it does this. Okay, that was better. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to go, well, let's take 2 more PSI out and see if it's even better. And then suddenly you do that and that's worse. Okay, well, that's the limit. Now let's see if we add tire pressure. What happens? And add it again, and what happens? And now you have swept front tire pressure, and And that's what I would encourage anybody on a track day to do with, everybody can do tire pressure. If you have, if your, Club Formula Ford Crosley came with a box of springs, well, you can sweep springs too. You can go, work on the end that you think isn't working. If your car understeers too much, try stuff on the front. You think it's oversteers too much, try stuff on the rear, and whatever you can do. But don't give up because, I can't change springs because I don't have them, or I can't change shocks because I don't have them, so I'm stuck. No, you can at least change tire pressure. And then we are talking about driving, I know.
Yeah.
So you can also change your driving style.
Yeah.
To try to fix that problem. And you can sweep driving styles. Okay, I'm going to get on the throttle really early. Ooh, I'm going to coast and get on really late. It's the same kind of thing. Yeah, I've heard you talk to drivers about that 100 times. And it's great for me because if the driver can fix it, it masks engineering deficiencies that I've come up with. It's like, okay, that's all I can do. Now it's up to you. So try sweeping driving changes just as much as you do engineering changes. But to me, back to the original question, everybody's got a tire pressure gauge. Take it to the racetrack, and it is amazing how much you can affect your car with that simple thing.
Right. Actually, we did that Tune Your Car webinar last year, and it was hugely popular. And actually, hey, I think we need to do another one of those, Jeff.
Let's do it. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, we'll do that one again. But I actually remember that point that you just made of, work on the end of the car that's not working. If the car is understeering, yeah, you could take grip away from the rear of the car, right? But that kind of,
right. We want more grip.
Yeah.
Grip. Yeah. And believe me, there's times more than I am proud to admit, but there are times when you're like, okay, we're understeering. I tried all these things in the front and I just can't get it. I don't know. I'm not smart enough. I don't have what's available to me. I need the designers to go back and redesign the suspension, and we can't do that now, or whatever you run up against. And you then do have to go to the rear because balance is still key.
Yeah.
You just want the most balance, the most grip with a balanced car. You'd actually take less grip to get balance if you had to, but you never want to go there until you're sure you've exhausted everything you can to get a balanced car with a lot of grip.
Right. Yeah. So back to driving. We talked about earlier, you drive in some chump car races with Colin. And, one of the things that I noticed and we talked about was, hey, you're pretty darn quick for a guy that hadn't raced. I mean, how many years was it from the last time that you actually drove a race to when you did a chump car race a year or so ago?
Yeah, probably 25 years.
Yeah.
From when I was a kid, I raced SCCA, G production, and hadn't been in a car for 25 or more years.
Yeah.
Maybe 30 years.
So I'm curious. I mean, how can you be out of a car for 25 years, hop in a car, and immediately go pretty darn quick? You weren't, Colin's not worried about his job quite yet.
Not at all.
Yeah,
not at all.
But you went pretty quick. And a lot of people, I mean, I get a lot of emails from people saying, geez, I've been out of the sport for 10 years or whatever. How do I get back up to speed? You're way out of the car for 25 years or so, and you get back in, you're quick. How does that happen?
Peer pressure. Maybe I had no choice. It's like I didn't want to be the wanker guy out there just putting around, No, I don't know. I think one of the things I try to do as an engineer, and that I know helps me, is I really have sympathy or understanding for what the driver's going through and what he's doing. So I try to put myself in his position where I'm engineering cars with pro drivers. What's he really dealing with? What does the car really feel like? I try to draw out of my drivers what it feels like. Don't give me an engineering explanation. What does it feel like when you put on the brakes? How does it feel on your body? How does it turn? What are you feeling through the steering wheel? Because I've always thought that if I can give the driver a car that responds the way he wants it to respond, which may be different than another driver, but it responds the way he wants it to respond, he'll get the most out of it. So I think I'm probably a frustrated driver that wasn't good enough to make it as a pro, so I went engineering. So I still have that sympathy for driving, and so when I got in the car, it was like almost like I'd been doing it for those 30 years because I'm listening to these pro drivers say it feels just like this, and I do like this, and I open my hands at the end of the corner when this happens, and so it's like, okay, I hadn't actually been doing it, but I've been listening to these guys tell me how they do it for 30 years, and I just was like, okay, it seemed fairly natural. So maybe that's a big advantage that I have, but it wasn't that big a deal.
Well, I got to think, I mean, hey, you drive a car mentally, even without physically driving it, right? So all those years of debriefing, hearing drivers talk about this, looking at data, looking at video, I think one of the things that makes you so successful as an engineer is you think like a driver. So you kind of put yourself in that position as kind of like, what would I want it to do? And I think for the last 25 years, you've actually been mentally programming yourself to drive fast. And that, you just hopped in the car and you kind of could go and do it because it's been running through your mind for 25 years.
Exactly. And the one thing that really, and you say drive mentally, and I think that's right, that's really helped. The one thing I know absolutely that I was really horrible at was something I hear you say all the time, and with drivers we've worked for, and I'm like, yeah, Ross says that all the time, keep your eyes up, look forward, look ahead. I was like, I hear that all the time. And for me as an engineer, that's not an important thing. That doesn't help me. But I hear you say that with drivers I've worked with. I got in the car and I'm watching the apex go by me, and I'm, like, I can hear you and other coaches in my mind. Keep your eyes up. I had a hard time with that. And that's huge, 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 because I'd never... Driving the chump car has really given me even more appreciation for what the drivers are going through and what you have to do. And that whole eyes up thing was big for me.
I keep saying to a lot of people, a lot of drivers will come and they're asking me for advice, and ask you for advice, and I think what they're looking for is some super trick thing. And, what is the one big advanced thing that the greats do? And, I keep saying that the advanced stuff is just really doing the basics really well. And the basics of get your eyes up and look farther ahead. It's such basic stuff, but we spend so much time driving around the street, looking at the taillights of the car in front of us. We get kind of in this habit or a mental program to look down there. So we get on the track, and you got to keep reminding yourself of that. It's interesting. So
it was big. I think the other thing that's, and maybe you touch on it, or I don't know, this could end up being a 5-hour podcast at that rate. But the whole iRacing, the whole iRacing simulator thing is great for that kind of stuff. I mean, I got back after our first jump car race, and I wrote down in my book, eyes up, look forward, because I was bad at that, and that frustrated the heck out of me. Jumped back on the simulator, and I usually do some simulator time before each race that I'm going to go engineer a car with. Like, okay, we're going to Daytona in about 4 days to go to the Roar. I'll jump on my simulator for a half an hour to an hour and drive that, not because I'm going to drive it, but because it helps me understand more what the driver's going to go through, what that curb's like, and it helps me as an engineer. So I always try to drive at each track before we go there, just to get a better feel. So when I'm talking to the driver and he says, yeah, that little curb where that dip is right there, and I'm like, yeah, I do know that because I drove through there 10 times preparing.
See, how many other engineers do that? And that goes back to that. I think one of the things that makes you so successful is you think like a driver. You not only think like a driver, you've done it. Yeah. Because
we started this whole thing out is, engineering. I don't like engineering for the engineering. What I really like is winning. And so
that's kind of cool.
Right. So how do I win? And I'm not the driver because I'm not good enough to be a professional race car driver. My contribution to winning is setting the car up, talking to the driver, making the car go fast, and doing the strategy. So that's all I care about is making that work so that we can win. And to me, it's all about drivers. I think it's I like a quote from Bill Belichick, who said that players win games and coaches lose games.
Yeah.
And I'll switch that to drivers win races and engineers lose races.
Well, and driver coaches too. Does that apply? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
So it's to me it is about the driver, and that's what makes our sport so cool. If it was just these autonomous cars racing against each other, and I'm an engineer, I should really like that. I think that'd be horrible to watch. It'd be, maybe there's some other aspect of it, but to me, it is about the driver. So I want to know what he's going through, and I work on making the car work for the driver much more than I do what the spreadsheets or the simulations say. That helps me get there, but it's ultimately comes down to what the driver's doing. So if I can understand what he's going through better by a few laps on an iRacing simulator, I think I can help him get that car better at the racetrack.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. So I got one more question for you. Ready for this one?
Okay.
What's the strangest thing anyone has ever asked you? Well, about driving or racing, I guess.
I've had a lot of strange questions, but
I'm sure.
So here's So here's one that, when you say that pops right into my mind. So it must be at the top of the list. So it was my son Colin asked me this. He was doing NASCAR at the time. I think you and I have talked about this, and we still have this debate. But he was doing NASCAR at the time, running for Jack Roush in the Truck Series, and he was at Daytona, and he got out of the car. It was the end of the day or whatever. He goes, "Dad, do you think that if I got to the start finish line in my NASCAR truck and closed my eyes, or put my visor that was complete, had tape on it, put my visor down so I couldn't see, do you think I could make a lap at Daytona without seeing?" That was a pretty strange question, because it's nothing that You know, it's nothing that I had ever thought about trying or anything like that. That was pretty off the wall. You know, like, you think a stiffer right front spring would help it turn better? Yeah, I can help them with that.
Yeah.
That one was pretty off the wall.
And I remember us talking about that one. Yeah. What
yeah,
did we decide?
Did we decide?
Well,
I'm not sure. I think it was still a debate.
I'm convinced that Colin could do that with enough prep time. Like if he went out and ran enough laps, you know, and did enough mental imagery and, you know, had enough laps and then came around there, he could do that. You know, would it be absolutely dead on line? It's going to have some variance, but you know, right. I've driven in races. In fact, I remember driving a race at Daytona in the 24-hour race one time in a prototype called closed cockpit prototype car. This was way back. This was 93. So it was before we had all the lights on at night.
Oh, right.
And as you came around 5, you turned back towards the grandstands that had light. Well, the light glared on the windshield, and about 2:00 in the morning, the windshield was so pitted and covered in grease and oil and everything else that I'd come out of turn 5 and I was completely blind. It was, I mean, I could have seen more if I closed my eyes, I think. And and I can remember driving a whole stint coming out of there and kind of going, da-da-da-da. It got that apex curb, unwind the wheel, da-da-da-da. There's the exit curb, catch a gear, 1, 2, brake, down, turn in, da-da-da-da. Okay, now I can see again. So that little section of the track, I drove blind for a hour and a half stint. So it can be done.
Yeah.
I'm not going to recommend it.
No.
Okay, so that's a strange one to end on, I guess.
That was a strange one. That's pretty far out there. And it's driver related. So.
And you know, no surprise that a strange question came from Colin, your son.
He's a strange kid.
Yeah.
Really strange.
And Colin will be a guest on here, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, he can get back at me, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll pick on you at that point. And so Jeff, I mean, we're kind of out of time here, but definitely for sure I want to have you back on the show because
love to.
I enjoy sharing and talking with you about all this kind of stuff. Before we go, anything kind of what you're doing now, anything you want to share?
I'm having a blast. I mean, I get to run my kid, and you know, I've told people that there's been a lot of years of our life where I paid money and didn't work, and got to run Colin when you're karting in Europe and America and all that kind of stuff, and it cost me money, and we got to work together, and now John Bennett has given us at Core has given us the chance to work together, and amazingly enough, maybe John's going to listen to this, but thank you, John, for paying us to do that. It's pretty amazing. But we get to work together, so that's cool. We're doing the Global Rallycross this year, along with our IMSA GTD program. Both John and Colin drive the Global Rallycross cars. That's been a new, fun experience because you know, it's completely different. You mentioned drag racing, which is pretty weird and different, but Global Rallycross is another weird and different thing, and been having a blast doing that. So it's going to be a season of GTD with our new Porsche and Global Rallycross.
And if people want to follow you or whatever, I mean, what's the best way?
I do have a page on Facebook. It's called Auto Racing Tech Tips. So it's Facebook.com/Auto Racing Tech Tips, I think is what it is. And go ahead.
And I'll put that link. I'll put that link on our show notes, and so people can click on that. And it's cool stuff. I mean, you put some really interesting and educational kind of stuff on there. So I know some big name race engineers, by the way, who go, I can't believe Jeff gives away this stuff because I use it all the time. So some of your competitors, Jeff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I realize that sometimes, and I try to keep that page not technical. So you know, sometimes there's tips of like, hey, and the tips are, hey, if you're at a race, watch what these guys are doing because here's why they're doing it, and it makes your understanding of watching races on TV or in person more fun and enjoyable, and you get an insight into what drivers and engineers and driver coaches and strategists are talking about sometimes. So it's fun on there. Unfortunately, I don't post regularly. It's like, geez, I've been busy racing for 3 months. I should put something up there, or something just pops into my mind and I'll put it up there. So it's not always regular, but there's some stuff on there. I enjoy doing that.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks for doing that and sharing that. And thanks for being on the show, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ross. Let's do it again. This
Yeah.
is anytime. I really enjoy talking racing, and especially with you, and always learn something. So it's fun.
And as we always tell our drivers before they go on the track, have fun.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Each episode, I'll share a quick speed secret with you, a short reminder that I hope will stick in your mind and be useful the next time you're on track. Here's today's tip. Make your car show its weakness. Okay, I know that not all of you want to drive right at the ragged edge on the limit, but I get emails every week from drivers asking how to find and drive at the limit, so I know some of you do. I also get asked how to sense what their car is doing and how to read what changes it needs in its setup to make it faster. The key is what I just said. Make it show its weakness. If you come in off the track and I ask you, what's your car doing? Understeer, oversteer, or whatever, and if you say it's okay, then you haven't made it show its weakness. And that tells you that you have room to push before you're at the limit. When you come off the track and know that your car oversteers on entry, understeers on power, or whatever, then you're making it show its weakness, and you're spending at least part of the time at the limit. If you'd like more tips, advice, and resources, check out my website at speedsecrets.com. And if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the Speed Secrets podcast. And even better, leave a review on iTunes. That would be huge and something I'd really appreciate. Also, please share with your friends. Hey, keep learning and having fun.